conception of national and global economic justice contrasted. So moral universalism demand three justification of national and global economic justice. So first justification is that surrendering the discrepancy, that in a state or country we had different fundamental moral principles in socio-economic rights or in national economic order. So by strengthening minimal criterion, we can able to apply the said criterion to the global economic order, which are the first possibilities in surrendering the discrepancy. Second possibilities is that by weakening the minimal criterion, we can able to apply the two criterion to national economic order. Such criterion presented below, like limitation of what justice allows, stabilizations of global economic order, which is the first minimal criterion in both global economic or national economic order. Second justification is that defending a discrepancy of minimal criterion. So by justifying the view of our global economic order, we can able to conclude that our global economic order is not just, or our national economic order is not just, even if such principles fails to meet the minimal criterion of justice we apply to national economic order. For example, the economic happening in the United States of America, which the continuation of inflation or the rise of dollar value, other countries suffer severe poverty or crisis in a society, but this crisis happened because of the inflations of such country. So the export and import cause severe inflation to other societies or countries. So other countries suffer from crisis of gasolines, foods, clothing, and so on. And third justification is that insisting the discrepancies of minimal criteria while rejecting the universalist demand to justify this discrepancy. These third justifications claims that national economic regimes are subject to some minimal criterion of justice, that global economic order is not subject to third criterion, and that no justification can or needed be given for such discrepancy. So we can conclude that even if our economic national order fails to meet the minimal criterion of social justice in our country, crisis or poverty happen to due to other countries' inflations or the raises of dollar value. Moral universalism and David Miller contextualism. Since we believe our moral ways of life in a society which we live in, that right is right, and trivialize this moral life, so David Miller developed such sophisticated moral principles in a society. Positions arguing for the anti-universalist claim that we should allow diverse moral principles to hold in different contexts without demanding any justification for such diversity. We can insist that morality is heterogeneous, since there are other countries allowing the practice of polygamy and other allow the practice of death penalty as a means of justice. As we can observe that there is no such fundamental principles of morality in this world, since other people or country had their own logical justifications or reason for practicing of such practice, the same as how such national economic order being practiced or happen in a specific state or country, and other country can able to picture out such economic order of their country that they fails to meet the principles of socio-economic or social rights. But this happens due to heterogeneous practices of morality. And David Miller argued for this heterogeneous morality and present the contextualism that we had different principles. of justice being used at a different times and in different place, and that itself has an underlying logic that we can both grasp and use as critical tool when assessing the prevailing conceptions of justice at any particular moment. So by appealing such underlying logic, we also formulate justifying reason for the application of different moral standard to person from different social classes. The same for the applications or the different assessment of national and global economic order. But perhaps universalism does not affirm that there is a supreme moral principles, as what I have discussed recently, that morality has no fundamental principles in this world that each nations or the whole people must to follow. So applying such principles of morality in a society, it must have logical justification or logical acceptance of reason for accepting such principles or practice in a society. And that therefore we can affirm that there is no such supreme moral principles. The same to the concept or the conceptions of national economic order or global economic order. So therefore, we both had different moral principles applying in different institution of political system, especially for global and national economic order. So we differ in regard to what the limitations of such principles and justifications, but perhaps we find it acceptable in a society or country which we live in. Contextualist moral universalism and John Rawls' moral conception. Rawls affirm that what moral principles may apply to the people, personal conduct, and limiting the range of principles of justice to the basic structures of society. According to Rawls, to achieve stability of national economic and global economic order, basic social institutions should be treated as separate contexts to which distinct and moral principles apply, so that social institutions had their own principles of morality to count of what is just and fair in a society, and that also people who belong to the specific states or countries had their own moral principles which may apply to their personal conduct. Rawls' global economic order conceptions is that global economic order is designed to satisfy the different principles which goal of such an order is nonetheless morally inappropriate to our world. And such national economic order rules conceptions is that society must subject to their national economic regimes to other criteria, that a society that fails to satisfy the different principles may not nonetheless not be unjust. As what I have previously discussed, that morality is heterogeneous, we can conclude also that national economic order of other country is also heterogeneous. It because they had their own underlying logic, with also formulate justifications of reason for the application of different moral standard in specific institutions of the country. And even if the country national economic order fails to meet the principles of minimal criterion of justice, it is not unjust, since such country or society had their own different justifications and underlying logic of the acceptance of principles. And rules suggest for applying or suggest the applying principles of global economic order that society must accommodate decent principle in which decent society are ones to which offer reciprocal recognition of full and equal standing of member in a well-ordered system of states. Rawls' decent principles of society is that system of law must follow a common good idea of justice that takes into account what it sees as the fundamental interest of everyone in society. So Rawls' further pinpoint of these decent principles of society is that No people should have to live under unfavorable conditions that prevent people from having just or decent political and social regime. Rules hold that global order can fully accord with liberal conceptions of justice which had no decent principles. Rationalizing divergent moral assessment without a double standard. So in this chapter, they present how poverty happened in national economic order. So poverty happened due to national economic regimes and the corrupt incompetent elites who impeded national economic growth and the fair distribution of national product. So due to domestic defects and such elite groups who hold or acquire position in political institution, which are the main reasons why other countries suffer severe poverty line and society becomes more poorer. We judge the global economic order inequality, but perhaps we fail to recognize why such country suffers severe poverty. So we must bear in mind that global economic order is not a significant causal causes of this severity poverty line happen in society or country. Rather, it happened due to incompetent and corrupt elites by siphoning off much wealth to aid their own pockets. And the corrupt social institution and corrupt elites is the exogenous facts in this modern political sphere. The causal role of global institution in the persistence of severe poverty. So the international borrowing privilege is the privilege which is the power to affect legal valid transferations of ownership rights in such resources. However, corporation or elite groups who occupied positions in the political institution is entitled to be and internationally recognized as a legitimate owner of such country resources. And such group overpower the national and global economic order, so they control the country. And such group or elite groups give away the country natural resources right and accepting money in return. So in this case, purchase acquires possessions and all rights and liberties of ownership supposed to be protected and enforced are being abused and used by other country. So this international borrowing privilege had three negative effects to the national economic order. So one, it puts country into full credit of disposal of their country's natural resources ownership of rights. So it puts country to full credit disposals of ownerships of their natural resources rights. Those rulers who take advantage of this privilege and maintain their possessions through violence and repressions in the vulnerable society. And the ruler then can be able to borrow the country money easily for their own personal gain by not putting the bet on it, and which the country are obliged to pay. Then ruler also can able to maintain themselves in positions to political institution in power. Second negative effect of international borrowing privilege is it strengthens incentives toward coup attempt and civil war. So due to rulers' power in governance or in political institution, it can able to produce civil war in a state due to coercions under rulers' control in governance. Third negative effect of international borrowing privilege is that countries suffer huge debts and cause less stable national economic order. So it saps the capacity of country to implement programs to aid the poverty line in the society due to this elite group who control the national economic order and corrupting the country's money to aid their own pocket. So those international borrowing privilege and global factors strongly affect the overall incentive of oppressions and poverty happening phenomena throughout the whole world. The wealthy society significantly also contribute to such severe poverty phenomena in other country by the continuations of their the high inflations which export and import cause severe crisis, and that society suffer from poverty due to this elite international privilege. So the conclusion can be drawn in this reporting is that to achieve socio-economic rights or social justice, We must set fundamental moral principles or fix fundamental moral principles in this system of government, which socio-economic rights was afforded to all people who belong to that system of government, that it subjects all persons to the same system of fundamental moral principles of political institution. So, such principles assign the same fundamental moral benefits and burdens to all people who belong to that society or country. And such fundamental moral benefits and burdens are formulated in general terms so as not to privilege or disadvantage certain persons or groups in that society, which is the only solutions to achieve the socio-economic rights or social justice to have stable national economic order. And national and global economic rights can only be achieved if we can able to eradicate corruptions in this political institution and to overthrow the international borrowing privilege who strongly affect the overall incidence poverty line happening throughout the whole world, which wealthy society or countries significantly contribute to such severe poverty by the continuations of inflations, which export and import cause severe crisis and that society suffer from poverty due to this elite corrupt who take advantage this international privilege borrowing, and that to achieve a moral universalism and global economic justice is to have a system of government which free from corruption and having good incentives of political system. And that's all. Thank you.